We often return to the same emotional patterns without realizing we're doing it. Jung believed these repetitions are not random, they are the psyche's attempt to resolve something unfinished. In this episode, we explore why familiar pain feels safer than uncertain healing, how the unconscious shapes the people and situations we choose, and how Jung's ideas can help us finally interrupt the cycles that feel like fate. If your life feels like a story you keep rereading, this episode will help you understand why. There are moments when life feels like a loop we never asked to enter. We find ourselves in the same arguments, the same relationships, the same emotional disappointments. The details differ, but the feeling is unchanged. It's easy to assume this means we're flawed or failing, yet the truth is gentler. We repeat what we don't yet understand. Carl Jung devoted his life to exploring the unseen forces beneath our behavior. He believed our choices are often shaped by unconscious memories, fears, and desires. As he famously wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." To Jung, repetition is not an accident, it is communication. The psyche speaks not through words, but through patterns. If we keep meeting the same kind of pain, it may be because something inside us needs to be witnessed, held, or integrated. And until that deeper truth is recognized, the pattern returns, hoping we will finally listen. Jung didn't see these repetitions as failures, but as invitations. The loop is not meant to imprison us, it's offering us a key, and when we begin to understand its language, the entire story of our life becomes clearer, kinder, and more open to transformation. In the modern world, we often mistake speed for progress. We move fast, think fast, react fast, and in that pace, our emotional patterns run on autopilot. We rarely pause to consider why we feel so drawn to situations that end in the same familiar pain. But repetition is rarely about the present moment. It's about what the present moment awakens in us. Someone raised around emotional distance may gravitate toward partners who are incapable of intimacy, not because they want to suffer, but because distance feels predictable and predictability feels safe. A person raised in chaos may find silence unbearable. They seek intensity because it mirrors the environment they were shaped by. And those who learn to stay small to keep the peace often grow into adults who apologize for existing. These patterns are not mistakes. They are survival strategies that once made sense. But over time, what protected us begins to limit us. The emotional autopilot becomes a cage we don't realize we built. In a culture focused on productivity, it's difficult to slow down long enough to recognize these inner loops. We assume this is just who I am, or this is the kind of person I attract, or this is my type of relationship. But Jung would challenge these assumptions. He'd say the pattern is not your personality, it's your history repeating itself, asking to be acknowledged. Jung believed that repeated pain is a symbolic message. The psyche communicates in circles because it cannot speak directly. When we find ourselves reliving the same emotional experiences, choosing similar partners, collapsing under the same anxieties, abandoning ourselves in the same moments, it is the unconscious trying to resolve an unfinished story. He wrote, "We meet ourselves time and again in 1,000 disguises on the path of life. Every repetition is one of those disguises. The partner who neglects you may reflect parts of yourself you've neglected. The friend who always takes but never gives may mirror the boundaries you've never learned to set. The opportunities you sabotage may echo an inner belief that you're unworthy of more." To Jung, the repetition is the entry point. It asks, what part of me is alive in this situation? What fear is being replayed? What longing remains unmet? What truth about myself have I not yet faced? Once we begin to look at patterns symbolically rather than literally, life becomes readable. The people we attract are no longer random. The conflicts we repeat are no longer mysterious. The pattern transforms from a source of shame into a map, and that map always points back to the parts of ourselves we have not yet come home to. In everyday life, these insights become visible in subtle, familiar moments. You might find yourself trying to earn affection from someone who offers very little, echoing a childhood belief that love must be chaste. Or perhaps you shut down in conflict because, long ago, silence protected you from emotional volatility. Maybe you constantly take care of others to avoid admitting your own needs. These moments feel personal, but they are also universal. We all carry emotional blueprints, unconscious patterns that shape our reactions before we even realize what we're reacting to. Stress pulls the blueprint into the present. Intimacy pulls it even faster. Jung would ask us not to judge ourselves for these patterns, but to observe them gently. When an argument unfolds exactly like the last 5 arguments, it's not proof that we haven't changed. It's a sign we're touching a wound we haven't yet healed. When you repeat a mistake you swore you'd never make again, it's not flaw. It's the psyche returning to a lesson you weren't ready to complete. The moment we begin witnessing the pattern in real time, the loop starts to loosen. The emotional script we've memorized so well suddenly feels open to revision, and even a single moment of awareness can shift an entire lifetime of repetition. This awareness creates a turning point. Suddenly, the pattern that felt like destiny becomes something we can study, understand, and eventually soften. Jung believed that genuine change begins when we stop running from our inner shadows and start approaching them with compassion. He wrote, "Knowing your own darkness is the best method for dealing with the darknesses of other people. When we acknowledge our fears instead of hiding them, we no longer rely on others to activate them for us. When we admit our longing rather than bury it, we stop choosing people who confirm our sense of deprivation. When we allow ourselves to grieve what we never received, we stop reenacting the same longing in every new relationship." The turning point arrives quietly, in a moment when we pause before reacting, when we ask ourselves what the situation reminds us of, when we wonder what the hurt is trying to protect. This pause is powerful. It interrupts the automatic cycle and creates a small space, small but enough for transformation to begin. With each moment of insight, the repetition loses its authority. The old patterns don't vanish overnight, but they become less convincing, less seductive, less inevitable. We begin to feel the possibility of a life that is not ruled by the past. Integration means allowing the insight to reshape who we are. It requires patience, gentleness, and a willingness to sit with discomfort. Integration does not demand perfection, it asks for presence. We start by naming what we feel instead of hiding it. We learn to soothe our anxiety without abandoning ourselves. We let our sadness be heard instead of buried. We take responsibility for our patterns without shaming ourselves for having them. New questions begin to guide us. What am I repeating? What am I afraid to lose? What am I afraid to feel? What younger version of me is being activated right now? These questions turn inner chaos into clarity. They help us see the emotional logic behind our choices. And when we understand our patterns from the inside, we no longer need the outside world to reenact them for us. Integration is the process of becoming emotionally whole, not flawless, but conscious. And in that consciousness, new choices emerge. We become capable of relationships that honor our boundaries, careers that reflect our values, and inner lives that feel steady rather than reactive. This is where transformation begins, in recognizing that we are not bound to the blueprint we inherited. At the heart of this journey lies a truth Jung returned to again and again. Repetition is a call toward authenticity. We revisit old emotional landscapes because some part of us still hopes to be met, understood, and healed. Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." Becoming who we truly are requires looking at the parts of ourselves we've denied, our longing, our anger, our vulnerability, our dreams. It requires acknowledging when we're hiding behind old identities, old roles, old fears. When we meet these parts with honesty, the pattern begins to dissolve. What once felt like fate becomes a choice. The past becomes a reference point, not a destiny. And slowly, the emotional loops that shaped our life lose their power. We don't always recognize the exact moment the shift happens. Sometimes it's subtle, a conversation that ends differently, a decision that feels clearer, a moment where we stay present instead of retreating. These small moments accumulate, and eventually they form a new emotional path, one aligned with who we are now, not who we had to be then. This is the real liberation Jung spoke of, not escaping the past, but integrating it so fully that it no longer needs to repeat itself. If any part of this story reminds you of your own life, let it reassure you nothing about your patterns makes you unworthy or broken. They are simply echoes of times you adapted the best way you could, and those adaptations kept you alive, connected, and protected. Now, as you grow, the patterns that once safeguarded you may feel restrictive. This is not a flaw, it's a sign that you're ready to live differently. When you listen to your patterns with gentleness instead of judgment, the story begins to change. Not instantly, not dramatically, but slowly, patiently, and deeply. If this gave you something to think about, subscribe for more videos like this. Thank you for watching.